Cool. Welcome to the meeting for the 5-minute production app. Shri, thanks for populating the agenda. You want to start?
Yeah, let's do it. Let me share my screen. It'll be useful for some of the topics on the agenda. Let's start with the first item. Shout out to Nuritsi. With her help, we were able to reach out to Let's Encrypt, and we got exceptions for GitLab domains. So normally, if you're using Let's Encrypt and Certbot, you have a 50 certificate limit per domain. But we were able to collect a list of domains belonging to GitLab and get an exception. We initially asked for 1,000 certificate per domain limit, but they were kind enough to offer 3,000. So lovely. And yeah, here's the list of domains for which we got the exception.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's item number one.
Thanks,
Second
Nuritsi,
one.
for that. Thanks, Let's Encrypt. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. The second topic is a request that came in from DZ related to speeding up the pipelines. Specifically, the provision job isn't always necessary. So can we skip it? So there's a flag that has been introduced called DF provision skip, and you can turn that on to skip the provision job if needed. The second thing we're able to do is it's possible to trigger the auto build and the provision job simultaneously using the needs parameter in the YAML. So that's something I've tried out in another project, which I'll talk about later. And that seems to work well in terms of speeding up the pipeline as well. So yeah.
Cool. So what's the outcome of this? We're gonna just run those jobs in parallel?
Yes, potentially run them in parallel, or if provision doesn't need to be run at all. For example, if the infrastructure files haven't changed, then we can just altogether skip that job. So we save 2 to 3 minutes there.
Yeah, that'd be great. But can we detect that automatically, whether it's needed?
Eventually, yes. Right now, the way it has been set up, no.
Okay. What do we need to change in the setup to detect that automatically?
Well, okay, so we can do it in terms of having rules in place. So in the YAML, if you define the rules such that you look for changes in particular files, we know whether the infrastructure file has changed or not. Another way of doing it is to generate the TF plan and to see whether the plan has modified. So there are some ways of going forward. Yeah.
But those rules in the YAML file that sounds like a great idea to me. That's relatively straightforward. It's fast. I think that would be great.
Yeah, I agree.
The fastest job is one you don't run.
Absolutely. So these are the two topics from me in the beginning. I think the next topic is yours, Sid.
Cool. Yeah, we reviewed the 5-minute production app with Peter Fenton. Thanks, Peter, for that. And then I noted a few things. It talked about a Redis. We had to set the Redis node type, and I would love for there to be a default. So we you only have to set it when it's different. The disadvantage of that is like you're putting up Redis infrastructure, but I think that so be it. Most apps these days require both a database and Redis. So I think I'd rather make it more. I think we should err to convenience over cost reduction at this point.
Yeah, sounds good. I've made a note for myself to create an issue for this.
Cool. Thanks, Sri. And then email. You had to put in an email. I think it was probably for their certificates or something like that. Maybe we can use a GitLab service desk to remove the need for that so that you can just use the service desk email of your project.
I think that's the default already.
Okay, in the demo to Peter, you manually configured it, so not sure why.
Okay, there must be some other reason why I did that. We use the service desk email by default.
Okay, cool. Thanks. I think what most companies in this space. I won't even know how to call the space. I guess it's make it easier to run applications are trying to do. Let's call it Heroku 2.0. They're trying to take dev practices and bring them to operations. We're trying to take operations practices and bring them to the development environment. So I almost think like we can brand this and kind of say, look, the hardest thing about an application is not the first deploy. The hardest thing is maintaining it over time. So everyone's starting off with like, we'll take what we do in dev and then bring that to ops is like, it's putting it backwards. The hardest thing is day two operations. So you should take those practices that you use in day two and bring those to the development environment. And basically, we already have it with the 5-minute production app. I just think it needs to be faster and faster and faster. So we figured it out. It's now just a performance optimization. But maybe we should kind of coin kind of a term like ops to dev or something like that to kind of accentuate how we're different than all the other solutions.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think what might be an interesting highlight is to clearly show what it takes to vertically scale the application and infrastructure with the 5-minute prod. So for example, you're starting with a VM that is a T2 micro. You're starting with the smallest possible Postgres, the smallest possible Redis, and to show how easy it is to upgrade those. Is that what you mean by day two operations?
Yeah. But also like the big thing is that we use managed services. So like there is no day two operations if you're running RDS, right? AWS is going to maintain that. So all the other things I'm seeing is everyone is like, well, we just take a bunch of Helm charts and it's awesome. And it's not. We know it's not awesome because now you're responsible for upgrading that database server and it's tedious and it doesn't make sense. So I think the use of managed services is the main thing I'm hinting at. So instead of, right now, everyone thinks about managed services as something you'll do in production one day, but you should already be using the managed services even when you're developing.
Yeah. All right. So is there an action item that you can recommend for this ops to dev trend highlighting?
I think the first thing would be a paragraph in the README detailing it, so we have something to refer to in the future.
Yep. Cool. All right. I am not very good at READMEs, but I'll give it a shot. I'll tag you and a few others in the MR, and we can see where we go with it.
Joanna, do you want to take that on you?
Sure, I can work on that.
Awesome. Thanks.
Lovely. I get to not do it. Perfect.
Yeah. Then point D is make more like the real app. I don't know what that means. I think if I had to guess, I think the demo app was a bit fakish, and I think we should make it a bit more real, like a bookstore or something like that. But I forgot what it was about.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I showed a guest book application. I'll add a task for myself to deprecate that.
I think E is more on this kind of ops to dev. Like we should stress that with the 5-minute production app, the day two operations are natural. Like you're already using kind of Terraform to manage your infrastructure. Like, hey, you just start out with Terraform at the same time. Platform versus service owners. I have no idea what I meant. G is more of the same, like we make it easier to embrace managed services. Managed services are how people run apps in production is today, and so embrace them from the start. Yeah, and I think I and J are the same, like let's do a real app, like a Rails, a Django, a Laravel app, not a I think the app kind of didn't use a database, didn't use Redis. Like our thing, I'm not sure. I might misremember.
It did.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. No, it used at least a database. It did not use much else.
Okay, I think the whole point for the 5-minute production app is not, we're not going to compete with, I don't know, a Vercel or a Heroku that does all those things. I think our bread and butter is going to be apps that that use a bunch of managed services, like that use email and that use this and that use that. Those are the tedious ones to set up, and that's the problem we're solving.
Yep. Fair point. Cool.
This is more input for Joanna. Most server runtimes, and I'll use that as the category for like Heroku 2.0, they use day 1 operations for day 2. We're taking we're using the day 2 operations for day 1. And then ours is just, we need to optimize it so that it's not slower than a normal day 1. But the benefit is super clear as soon as you move to day 2, as soon as you move to production.
Makes sense.
Cool. Sri, you had the overcoming AWS static IP limits.
Yes. So this was something, again, DZ and I ran into a couple of weeks ago, where our pipeline on master started failing. And it started failing because we ran into some resource limits. So just context here, as part of building the 5-minute production, we actually built a framework for testing pipelines called RPTF. Shitty name, but it works. So what it does is it triggers every time we change the YAML or any code inside the 5-minute production project, we use this framework to trigger several different pipelines under different configurations, and they use the modified version of 5-minute production, and they test whether we're getting expected failures or successes. So it's basically end-to-end testing framework for pipelines. Anyway, the challenge we faced was that we had so many test cases that the resource limit. So each test case basically deploys an application, uses up a static IP. And then we ended up exceeding the limit of 5 static IPs for my particular AWS account. And there was a way to get an extension or, just get beyond that limit. But the easier way was to just upgrade the framework. If you now look at the RPTF YAML spec that we have, each of the test case points to a different region. So we just sidestepping it is smart. Yeah, it is. It was easier to do this than to get permission to get an extension of the limit. So this is good for the framework as well. I wanted to do this for the framework because it's nice to be able to trigger pipelines with different variables. It lets you test better. So this was something I had to do, and this limit forced me to do it. So number 5 on the agenda. And if no questions, I can move on to point number 6, which is, I think, pretty exciting. I built a proof of concept of running 5-minute production. So this was something that I promised to do a long time ago, I think 2-3 months ago, and I finally got around to doing it. So I think I have the project open here. Yeah, so that's the URL. If you look at Readme, I've explained it. Conceptually, it's almost exactly the same. We authenticate into the Azure cloud, get credentials. We store the credentials inside our project or group. So this step is almost identical to what we do with AWS. We expect a deployable web application to be part of the repo with a Docker file in this case, and use the auto build job to build an artifact, a deployable artifact. We do that as well. And step 3 is where there are actually some changes. We have to rewrite the HashiCorp scripts to create the right kind of infrastructure. So if you look at my Azure portal and I go into the resource group, you will see that we have created the necessary Azure resources instead. take you back to the project. In the project, you want to be looking at the main TF file, and you will see the specifics of the of the resources being created on Azure. So this part is varies in content from what's there in the AWS project, but it does not vary in concept. The concept is the same. So we're still creating similar resources. Okay, after that, basically we've got a pipeline that looks almost identical. So you have a build stage, a deploy stage, a deploy stage, and so on. And with that, I am now able to demo to you a 5-minute production app deployed on Azure. Oops, not here. Go to environments, and you will see a URL that opens up this application. So this is a result of a pipeline that was executed in this project. So yeah, that's something that I got to share. Oh,
Very
what's
cool.
also worth sharing is, yeah, thank you. Pipeline, application, resources created. And finally, if you want to compare it back to what we have done with AWS, you can look at the checklist. Authentication is taken care of. Using of the auto build is there. I've provisioned the bare minimal resources right now. So this I think this particular proof of concept just creates the network, the VPC inside of it, and deploys the application to the VM. It does not provision databases, caching layer, etc., etc. But it's the basic, and because of that, there's no reason why we can't do that. So if we want to go forward, we can decide, well, we can decide if we want to go forward in this direction or not. And if we decide to do so, here are the to-do items that we have to work upon. So yeah, that's all I think I have to share around this.
Cool, nice work.
Yeah, thank you. So basically questions for you, and I don't want answers right now, but yeah, do we want to pursue this, or do we want to validate things before we actually go forward with other hyperclouds?
Up to you. I think we're not seeing a ton of usage of the 5-minute production app yet. So I'm like, I wonder whether making it available on different clouds is going to solve that. I think there should be a different avenue for that.
Yeah, fair enough, because it's quite an effort to build these things, and we want to validate that it gets used first.
Yeah, so I'd focus on, I think there's two things. There's an optimization problem and a marketing problem. The optimization problem is just make it faster. Like the longer you have to wait, the longer that cycle, the worse it is. So making it faster, I think that suggestion you gave at the beginning of the call, like skip that step if nothing changed in a certain files. I think that was a really great one. And then the marketing, we had a blog post that came out, but it was incomplete. Like it didn't really compare a production app. It compared a non-production app between the 5-minute production app and a Heroku, and it wasn't obvious from the article what the advantages were. So doing that article, but then with a full app might be interesting. And the alternative is to go more into this ops to dev direction and kind of contrast our approach with all the other server runtimes, more from a philosophical level.
Yeah, clear. Yeah. I think there's one challenge that we should address, and it might be AWS specific as well. And this is probably if you're an advanced user of 5-minute production. If you are, you may end up messing up your state. And then you're forced to either destroy everything or go into the AWS console and fix it yourself. Oh. So yeah, this doesn't usually happen. It happens when you fiddle around as much as I do with specific things, but it does happen from time to time. So this might be something that we want to look into as well.
Yeah, makes sense.
On a kind of related note, and I don't know if I should be saying this or not, but the Azure portal is so much better than the AWS console.
Great.
Just to use, yeah. Anyway.
Azure is having a lot of success, and I love that you selected them as the second cloud to make this. They're the second in popularity right now, so it makes sense.
Yeah, I chose it for selfish reasons. I have to deal with a lot of Azure-based customers out here, so it's nice to have a demo that I can use personally in my day-to-day work. But yeah, their portal is pretty good, especially when it comes to cleaning up resources. That's where I struggle a lot with AWS.
Cool. Have you seen any people opening issues or contributing to the 5-minute production app?
Recently, it's funny you ask, because we had a flurry of issues from one person in the last 3 or 4 days.
Okay.
And all valid points. I think, if you look at the issues, recent ones, you're going to find it. I think he made a contribution to the README as well. So at least some people are using it and they're contributing back. So that's nice to see.
Oh, that's really interesting. So I'm looking at the issues in the deploy template. From apply and deploy stage is not running when AWS default region is not set. Distinguishing from Heroku from Brendan. Cool, I'm going to do it by updated.
Some of them are closed as well. So you want to go into the closed, but Nanda definitely asked a lot of, he actually pointed out a couple of things that we had to recover. So one of DZ's resolver domains had run out of memory. So there was an issue for that somewhere. Anyway, so people are using it. We're getting some feedback. It's good.
Cool. Awesome. Well, that's very encouraging. Thanks, Sri, for your work on this. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Have a good one.